How's it going, everyone? So, Patrick Rose here today. I'm a photographer based in Christchurch, New Zealand. And today, I'd just like to talk about a nice little exercise I've been doing just when I'm taking photographs. As you know from my previous video, I've actually been really enjoying the LX100, and one particular feature that the LX100, hold up, just double check there. Okay. Anyway, so one particular feature I do really enjoy that the LX100 is doing for me as a photographer is it's really making me think more about my exposures. So with this LX100, you have your aperture dial, your shutter dial, and your exposure compensation dial. Now, with some SLR cameras do have a bit like a exposure compensation or exposure value inside the optical viewfinder. So when you're looking at the photo, so when you're looking at a scene and then you gently press the shutter button, you'll notice a little light meter which will show you your exposure. And for cameras like, especially for cameras like this LX100, a lot of the Canons, Nikons, Sonys, Olympus, you name it, like all digital cameras in general, they'll have a little meter which shows your exposure, whether you're overexposed or underexposed. You can also include in a histogram, but personally, I don't often use histograms because I find them to be quite distracting, especially if I'm looking through the viewfinder and I see it and I've installed histogram onto, say, like the top right or the top left of my screen, because I want to see the entire image. I want to see everything in the photo. So in today's video, I want to really show you what I'm referring to, especially with the just getting the right kind of exposure and really slowing down your photography, just so you actually appreciate more about images and just the slower process of things. Right. So, just as a starter, so the first thing you want to start doing is set it into manual mode. So I've already got it onto manual mode, but I'll just switch it to show. So that's shutter priority, aperture priority. So we're just gonna go back to manual. So this is what you'll be doing just to get the right kind of exposure. As you can see, just with this Olympus camera, so you see that you'll see three different numbers on the bottom. So bottom left is 3, so that's 1/3 of a second, and then my f-stop, which is f5, and then just on the right is what your exposure compensation is, and that's generally what we're going to try and work around. Now, this is all based on just this whole exercise, it's all based on the exposure triangle. So we're going to try and make it so with our just with the exposure, we get it at 0. So at the moment we have it at 0 point minus 0.7, I mean. And I might just quickly adjust the tripod a little bit so it's a bit more leveled. There we go. Okay. And we just want to get nice and close to our subject. Say right about there. So we are at 20 millimeters. And just adjust the focus. And there we go. All right, so at this stage we got plenty of options. So we can change the aperture, we can change the shutter speed, or we can change the ISO. Ideally, for this exercise, we want to try and make sure that our exposure is set to 0. The reason that we want it on 0 is so that way we still have enough to capture, especially for editing raw files. If it's overexposed, then a lot of our highlighted scenes are going to be too blown out, and we won't be able to get some of those highlights back, especially on a micro four thirds camera. Dynamic range is a big factor, so that's something to carefully consider. And the same thing with underexposing an image, because if we try and bring out the shadows, we'll be introducing a lot of noise in our shadows, so we want to try and balance things out perfectly. Okay, so this is a very easy one, so we can easily just readjust it to say 1/2 of a second, f5, and our ISO is at 200. So I'm just going to get a photo of that. Right. And we'll just zoom in on that. But of course, in other situations, sometimes we'll have much more light. So if I were to grab my light over here, just readjust that. And let's introduce some extra lighting like that. And as you can see, our exposure compensation has gone up by +2. So what we're going to have to do is try and adjust the either shutter speed, ISO, or aperture, so that way it's properly balanced. So what we'll do is just get more depth of field in. We're going to bring down the f-stop. So let's go all the way to 2.8, which is what this lens can do. And then we're going to have to adjust our shutter. As we can see, our exposure compensation is flickering at +3.0. And so we'll just adjust it. So now, take a photo of that. And ideally, if we go into info, now we could just see in here, so you have the histogram, and you could just see like a bit of the highlighted area. So that's going to be the overexposed. So what we're going to do is we'll do another shot. This time we'll just kind of bring down that, we're just going to go -0.7, which is kind of going a bit off the thing, just going off what I was just mentioning about trying to balance out the exposure value. But if we do that, and then we just review that photo, and just looking at the histogram, again, I think as well, especially with the position of the lighting as well, it is directly on the edge as well, so it is something to keep in mind. But there's kind of the idea of this exercise, especially when going out and taking photos out on the street, out in public, and just trying to balance out those sort of settings. Now, as well as that, because I haven't even shown the ISO, so we'll bring up the ISO, and it's showing over here our exposure value as well. So let's go up to 800, and as we can see, at ISO 800 we have an exposure value of +1.7. So we're going to adjust that to about 1/125 of a second. And again, like I said about the lights, the direct lighting is just where it's mostly affecting, especially with the camera. Our subject does have that reflective effect there. But yeah, that's basically the whole idea of just when using the LX100 or just any other camera in general, like just trying to balance out the exposure, just balancing out that exposure value. So the little uh, line there, just next to our camera, just down our camera there. So yeah, so it's just pretty much one of the little exercises I've been doing with the LX100. So I'll just bring it around to show this little guy right here. But yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed watching this video. If you have any questions, feel free to leave them in the comments below. I try to answer most questions as I can. Otherwise, feel free to check out my website at www.patrickrose.co.nz, and I'll see you guys in a future video.